Richard Syrett's Strange Planet. Following the truth wherever it leads. Exposing evil and corruption and the secret machinations of powerful elites. Revealing the high strangeness beneath the surface of our supposed reality. Coming to you from the Great White North and his studio beneath the stairs. Here's Richard.
How do, friends? Welcome to the program. What was the weather like where you are today? Wow. We had a torrential deluge. It was biblical. It was absolutely end of days kind of a downpour. But of course, I don't know where you are, but we needed it in a big way. And it must have rained for 4 straight hours up in Thornhill, Old Thornhill, where I reside these days. And the mighty Aphrodite remains over in the old country in Greece, coming home Monday, picking her up at the airport. It's been 3 weeks, man. I miss her. And the little guys, of course, miss her too. Spent the weekend. Saturday was just a scorcher. So I said, I can't have 5.5-year-old twins running around in the house all day. I thought it was just too hot for them to be running outside. So I went to Canadian Tire, which is our Walmart for those of you listening stateside. And I, not quite, sort of. Anyway, I went to Canadian Tire and I bought the little guys a wading pool. This was a huge wading pool, something like 12 feet in diameter and 36 inches high. And, so, of course, I take this thing out, spent, I don't know, $129. But I said, that doesn't matter. You know, it's hot. The boys got to cool off. So I unfurled this thing, and much bigger than I thought, dragged it out to the backyard, tried to find a level spot, and it turns out there's an inflatable ring around the pool that you've got to blow up. And took out the old hand pump. And standing there in 105 degrees, just giving her with this hand pump, and I must have pumped an hour and barely made a dent in this thing. Finally, about 2 hours later, I had the outer ring inflated, and then, of course, you start to fill the pool with the water. Meanwhile, the boys are standing there in their swimming suits saying, "Is it ready yet? Is it ready yet?" 3 hours later, they're in the water, splashing around, having a great old time, and of course, I am spent for the day. Anyway, a good time was had by all. So I hope you're keeping cool wherever you are, and we've got a cool one for you tonight, as always. A couple of years ago, I'm down at the Toronto, Canadian National Exhibition, the big CNE, the Grand Old Lady by the Lake, and I was doing a remote broadcast for another radio station, producing a talk show, and a couple of these teenagers were sort of hanging around the mobile unit, big like an RV, and they were dressed, how shall I say, in that goth uniform, you know, complete with the black fingernails and the black eyeshadow, and they kind of waved me over because they knew I did this the weekend show at the station, talking about what I talk about now, and they had something to get off their chest, and they told me about this experience they'd had with a Ouija board. And I don't know if they were pulling my leg. They seemed pretty legit. They seemed quite frightened, actually. They told me that a couple of years ago, prior, they had bought a Ouija board. They took it home. They thought the spirit world. They didn't like the message that came through, so they went out and they threw the Ouija board out. They just threw it out. And about a week later, one of them opens up a closet, and there it is, sitting in the closet again. So they take the Ouija board. This time they walk it across the street. There's a shopping mall with one of those great big garbage bins out back. They tossed it in that. They figured, okay, that's it. It's gone. Again, a week later, somebody opens up the closet. There it is. They could not throw this Ouija board away. So finally, they got online. They went on the internet, and they found out the proper disposal procedure for a Ouija board, which is apparently, I think you burn it or something. Anyway, yes, they threw it into the fire, and that was the end of that. But and they learned their lesson. Can you imagine throwing the Ouija board out and then you find it comes back to you again and again? Well, we're going to talk about Ouija boards tonight, or talking boards as they used to be called. Now, of course, it's like Kleenex, right? It's a brand name, but that's the only name that you call tissues, Kleenex. Well, Ouija boards, that was one brand of talking boards. Now we call them all Ouija boards. We're going to get into Ouija boards and who more credentialed than my next guest to discuss this. She joins us frequently on the program. Tonight we get her for the full hour, and I'm delighted. She's the author of more than 50 books on paranormal and metaphysical subjects. Her latest is Ouija Gone Wild, Shocking True Stories. Rosemary Ellen Guiley, welcome to the Conspiracy Show once again. How are you?
I'm doing great, Richard, and we have such a fantastic topic tonight. I can't wait to get into it.
Well, it is a fantastic topic. I'm concerned about the proliferation of Ouija boards, how people tend to use them as toys, and we'll talk about that. I can't believe that they're being marketed at young people in popular toy stores for children, in fact. I've seen them there. But let's go back and talk about the history of the Ouija board. For those people who've never even heard of them, and as hard as that may be to imagine, there may be some. They used to be called talking boards. What is a talking board exactly?
That's the generic term. And as you pointed out, Ouija is a trademark name, and it's become kind of a generic term. But it's a board made out of wood or cardboard or some other material that has each letter of the alphabet on it, the numerals 1 through 9 plus 0, and sometimes some other words like yes and no, goodbye, kind of a shorthand like that for getting yes or no answers to questions. And then it has a device which is called a pointer or a planchette, which is used to move around the board. And the idea behind the talking board is that you place your fingers lightly on the pointer or planchette, as it's called, ask spirits to answer a question, and then allow the spirits to theoretically move the pointer through your hands to spell out messages and to give numbers and to say yes or no. These devices have been in various forms for a long time. Human beings have used divinations for centuries, even millennia, to consult spirits for answers. The Ouija board itself, in the form that most people know it when they go to the store and buy a board, that's been around since 1892.
Wow. And do these things work? I mean, obviously, there is the potential for manipulation if one of the people who has their fingers on the planchette decides that they're, going to move it around wherever they want rather than letting the spirit move them. I mean, how can you sort of verify that the message coming through is not being manipulated by someone in the room?
It's always tricky with different kinds of spirit communications, evaluating the response. And yes, certainly I think there are cases where people subconsciously move the planchette. They anticipate an answer, or even in the back of their mind there's an answer they'd like to get. It's very hard to rule those cases out. But yet we have so many cases where it's harder to explain away, where the planchette seems to take on a life of its own and literally zoom around the board so fast you can hardly keep your fingers on it. I've had cases like that where I know I'm not moving it, and I know the other person that I'm working with, usually two people put their hands on the pointer. You wonder what's going on because the planchette seems to be operating through some other invisible external force. And yes, people do get accurate answers to questions, information that can be validated. And then there are other communications where things are just totally off, and people are given erroneous information that often influences them to do crazy and bizarre things and even commit crimes. The Ouija board has a very strange history.
Rosemary Ellen Guiley is with us. The book is Ouija Gone Wild, Shocking True Stories. We should say the book was written with Rick Fisher. Now, how do you, or who are you communicating with? Do you have a a clearer idea now than when you first started to research this? I mean, are you communicating with the souls of the departed on some spiritual plane? Are you perhaps being deceived, and are you communicating with demons? Who are you talking to?
I think all of the above, Richard. There are cases where people have gotten validated information that they've sought from people who've passed on. They want to communicate with a dead loved one, for example, and they get information that only they and certain family members would know, or that would be very particular to that dead person. Other people seem to have been in contact with spiritual guides, and they've channeled literary works, fictional works, inspired spiritual wisdom, starting with the Ouija board and then usually advancing to some other form of spirit communication that's a little faster than spelling things out letter by letter. Then there are these dark messages that seem to come from trickster spirits. They start out very friendly and good, and then once a person's trust has been gained, the messages get very dark and threatening, and people often start to have problems at home with nightmares and visitations and very unpleasant paranormal phenomena. So these seem to be more of a demonic nature. All spirit communications have the potential to go awry. There's nothing inherently bad about spirit communications or bad about talking boards. People can have all kinds of experiences, but it seems there are a lot of tricksters out there who like to get involved and turn things topsy-turvy.
Have you had a particularly harrowing experience with a Ouija board? I'm guessing that you have used Ouija boards on countless occasions. Can you share a story with me of an incident where your Ouija board went wild?
I've had several experiences where communications have kind of gone unexpected and also taken a negative turn. I haven't had any as horrific as some of the ones that we describe in the book, fortunately, where people have been plagued in the home environment after a session has been over. But in one particular case, this was in Salem, and I was with a group of friends staying in a haunted house, and we invited one of the well-known Salem warlocks, Christian Day, who's very mediumistic, to come and do a seance with us. And he brought his own Ouija board and a genuine human skull that he uses also as a tool for contacting spirits. And Christian and I worked the Ouija board together, and we got some communication where the communicator identified herself as a little girl who had lived in the house. This was a house that went back to colonial days.
Rosemary, let me interject here. We're going to pick up this story on the other side. The music is welling up underneath us, so when we come back, we'll find out about this Ouija board incident in Salem. And this is starting to get creepy already. We'll be back with Rosemary Ellen Guiley, paranormal researcher. Don't go away.
The truth will set you free. But first, it will really tick you off. Welcome back to Richard Syrett's Strange Planet.
Wow, what was that music coming back? David, that was frightening. There's the soundtrack for your summer. That certainly wasn't the Beach Boys, folks, let me tell you. Rosemary Ellen Guiley is with us, a paranormal researcher. And again, over 50 books to her credit. She investigates haunted places, entity contact experiences, UFOs, mysterious creatures, spirit communication, and more. Spirit communication, that's what we're on about tonight with her new book, brand new book, Ouija Gone Wild, Shocking True Stories. Let's get back to Salem, Massachusetts, and you're there with the number one warlock, I guess, in their parts, and you're about to sit down to a Ouija board.
Well, the pointer started moving very rapidly, and this was one of those cases where I could hardly keep my fingers on the pointer as it zipped around. And the communicator identified itself as a little girl who said she had lived in the house. Now, we didn't have the exact history of all the occupants of the home. We were renting it. It did go back to colonial days, so there were probably many little girls who lived in the house. And while this pointer was zipping around on the board, we started hearing these bangings and thumpings on the walls, like something was inside the walls pounding in the room, and these bangings went all the way around the room. So some of the participants got rather spooked by all of this, and we're doing it at night, of course. And this is often what happens to people is there are manifestations of phenomena, and they can be quite unsettling to some people. But what happened then with us is typical of many sessions as well. The communication begins to disintegrate, and instead of getting coherent words, you start to get gibberish. And after a while, nothing makes sense, and the energy either winds down or you just lose patience with it and end the session. And that's what happened with us. So sessions often start out good, and an energy builds and things manifest, and then things sort of unexpectedly dissolve. Many people still remain unsettled by that, and I think this is where some of their problems come in. They get spooked by the phenomena. They can't get it out of their heads. They keep thinking about it over and over again, and they become susceptible to a lot of things that might be lingering in the psychic atmosphere, so to speak. Another communicator that I have experienced periodically is an entity who calls itself Zaza, Z-A-Z-A. And this seems to be a variation of a communicator who is also known as Zozo. And this is a very negative, nasty entity who has shown up literally hundreds of times. And that's all, it may even be more than that, but just documented cases. And again, as disguised as someone friendly with helpful information and maybe even nice and entertaining, and then as the sessions go on, unmasks itself as a very threatening entity and makes dire predictions like somebody's going to die, the entity's going to get the people who are using the board, and things like that.
Well, once you use a Ouija board, if you use it just once, and let's say Zaza or Zozo shows up, or makes themselves known, have you essentially opened a portal? Is that like an invitation, and now they can walk through anytime they want?
Well, anytime you engage in spirit communications, whether you're using a board, a Frank's box, dowsing rods, even automatic writing, or mediumship, you are opening a doorway to the spirit world and inviting something to come through that doorway and interact with you. When the session is closed, that usually ends the opening, and you no longer have a link to anything that you've connected with. But in some cases, and a lot of it depends on the individuals and the environment and sometimes subconscious fears or anxieties people bring to any spirit communications, the link is never completely shut off. And spirits seem to have continuing access to a person. They can attach in some ways. And the attachments might be temporary. They might go away after a while. In some cases, they can be quite persistent, and people start having ongoing psychic attack problems. And Rick and I document some of those, especially with the Zozo phenomenon, in the book.
All right. When I opened the show, I was talking about these young goths who came up to me and told me about their misadventure with the Ouija board. Again, I don't know that they weren't pulling my leg, although they seemed frightened when they were retelling the story. And they couldn't get rid of the Ouija board. They threw it out. It came back to them. Have you heard stories similar to this?
Many times, and from many independent sources. So it's hard to ignore because I have encountered it so frequently over the years. Spirits do have the ability to move objects around, and I've had this happen to me in the course of my investigations. I've had things disappear and reappear. I've had objects I didn't even own appear, and it gets very hard to explain them away naturally. And in fact, I even have a small collection of Ouija boards. I've got about 7 or 8 of them, and the oldest one goes back to the 1960s. It's not real old. But one of the older ones I call my haunted board because its pointer went missing for a couple of years and then mysteriously reappeared in the box. And I have absolutely no explanation for how that happened. So I can lend credence to some of these stories about trying to dispose of a board and not being able to. Now, the thing about burning boards, some of the older boards were made out of masonite, which is very resistant to burning, and that may be the case for stories about, it was a demon board because I couldn't get it to burn, that sort of angle. And by the way, it's been Hollywood that has really promoted the whole demon angle. The board really was considered an entertainment device for decades and decades. But other people have tried to dispose of it. They've thrown it away into garbage. They've even broken it into pieces and thrown it away. The pieces show up again. Very mysterious what happens there. And so the occult explanation would be the spirits bring it back.
Let's talk about the Ouija board's involvement in particular murder cases.
There have been some very strange ones over the decades, cases where people have been incited to commit murder or attempt to commit murder because the Ouija board told them that someone needed to die. There have been cases where spouses have asked the spirits on the board if their spouse is cheating on them. They get a yes answer, so it enrages them and they attempt homicide. We have cases of jury members consulting Ouija boards about whether or not somebody is guilty. Now, that's a very scary thought to me.
It is, and hopefully grounds for a mistrial.
Cases are not being reported.
Yeah, I'm hoping that's grounds for a mistrial.
There was a very strange case in America in the 1930s where a woman thought her husband was having an affair with her neighbor, and the spirit said, yes, he is, and he's promised to give her all this money. So she and her daughter tie him up in the basement and torture him.
Oh, my.
Beat him up and subject him to a shock with electrical wires and to try and get him to confess that he's having this affair. And he denies it. The man evidently was not having an affair. And he managed to escape. They caught him, brought him back to the basement, started torturing him again. And he was able to break free, and this time he was enraged, and he killed his wife. So he was charged with homicide. And in the trial, all of this came out and about the Ouija board, and he was acquitted. It was ruled that he was justified in his actions. So here's sort of the twisted turn on the case is that she gets erroneous information about him and attempts to kill him, and he winds up killing her in the process. That's one of the strangest cases on record.
Oh my! Now, has a Ouija board ever been used to solve a crime?
Yes, in the early part of the 20th century. There were cases reported in the news about information being obtained on Ouija boards that would help find missing people, missing objects, stolen property, and even murder cases. But whether or not that evidence was ever really admissible as such in court, that remains a much more murky situation. But at least the information gave leads that did lead to the solving of some crimes. When the Ouija board came out in 1892, it was marketed as an entertainment device, as a way to contact spirits. People didn't have to go and consult professional mediums. They had the power of being a medium right at home, and many people started using them. there was a lot of publicity about the board, and it was a novelty, and that propelled it into the headlines. So we have a lot of these strange cases. But I'll bet you today nobody would want to admit that they were using a Ouija board to solve a crime, because so many people think the board is a problematic device. And that's really an erroneous image that has unfortunately gotten into pop culture through what I call the demonization of the board in film and fiction.
But I mean that risk is certainly there. I mean, as we've discussed.
Well, it certainly is, Richard, and this is a part of the peculiar history of the Ouija board. One of the reasons why Rick and I wanted to do this book is we thought the board really had gotten, in recent years, an unfair rap, with people associating it with bad things and bad entities, when overall, if you look at the whole history of the board, it's really not so. But it does have this dark underbelly to it, and that could very well be the way it's been used by people, the things they approach it for. And also, I think in many of these cases where crimes have been committed or people have entered into legal things that were bad for them, or divorced people and whatever because the board told them to, it may very well be that they're inclined to do something anyway, and they're looking for any sort of validation to give them permission to do so.
There's a couple of instances you cite in the book, Ouija Gone Wild, in which the board was used to locate missing persons. There was a case of Walter Moriarty back in 1920. Deserted his wife, 2 children.
Deserted his wife, and the Ouija board told her where to find him. Now, in some of these cases, the board is right, and in others, it winds up being kind of a dead end. But it's very peculiar where the board says, yes, you can find him in such and such a place. And I think she went to the police and enlisted their help as well. There are several cases like that. I'm sorry, the details of the Moriarty case escape me at the moment.
Yeah, no, it's just a very small entry here, but he was in New York, according to the Ouija board. Mrs. Moriarty remembered her husband had friends in New York. Police in New York were asked to investigate, and they found and arrested Mr. Moriarty right where Ouija said he would be.
Oh, yes, that's right. Yes, and there have been other cases where the Ouija board has said, well, it's you can find the person in such and such a place, and it winds up being a dead end. But in that case, it was right on. So what gives here, where nobody really knew where the man was, and so where did this information come from? Was it a helpful spirit? Was it some sort of data bank in the cosmos? It's very hard to explain these things away as manipulation and imagination.
Indeed. When we come back, let's talk about Grace Kelly, who is very interested in Ouija boards, and we'll also find out the mystery of Orab. Rosemary Ellen Guiley, paranormal researcher, discussing Ouija Gone Wild, shocking true stories. We'll get yours as well. Phone lines available to you. Stay tuned for the numbers. Back with more. Don't go away.
This is Richard Syrett's Strange Planet. Follow Richard on Twitter @Richard Syrett. For show information, visit the website strangeplanet.ca.
And if you have an experience with a Ouija board, we'd love to hear from you. It can be a negative experience, a positive experience. Welcome back. Richard Syrett with you here on The Conspiracy Show. Rosemary Ellen Guiley is with us. Ouija Gone Wild, Shocking True Stories. The book is written with Rick Fisher. And as you point out in the book, Rosemary, many of the early history cases of the Ouija board were collected by Rick as a result of his own Ouija experiences. Now, back in 1997, he had contact with a spirit claiming to be a Native American, and this communicator gave the unlikely Indian name of Orab. Tell us about this.
Orab was a woman who said she had lived between 1784 and 1840. And some of the details that she offered about herself seemed to make sense. That is, she sort of corroborated herself. She didn't give contradictory information. And she said she had lived in a place called Chickies. Now, Rick lives in central Pennsylvania. He's a longtime paranormal investigator, and we've worked together on many projects. And Rick had never heard of Chickies Rock, but it turned out to be a very real place and had quite a bit of Native American lore associated with it, and also a lot of haunting lore. It's a big bluff over the Susquehanna River. And she said she had lived there, and she had 2 children, and talked in some detail about her diet and her lifestyle with very strange spellings. There were a lot of OPs in her words, and her name even being Orop, a very unlikely Native American name. But that's the case with the Ouija board communications, that they seem to be very unusual sometimes, and there's no way to verify whether or not an Orop ever actually existed, but she gave the name of a place that turned out to be real that he had never heard of, and which became a very important site for his future investigations. Now, one day he asked her if she would actually show up for him if he went to Chickies Rock, would she manifest in some way for him? And she said that he should bring her a flower as a gift, and she would bring him an arrowhead as a gift. So he went to Chickies Rock at the appointed time, and nothing happened, but he had forgotten to take the flower. So he gets back on the board when he gets home and says, he asked, where was Arrowhead? Like, what happened to you? And the answer he got back was, where was Flower?
Oh, my.
Now, when she decided to stop communicating with him, he felt very sorry. He was sad. He felt like he was getting to know someone who was on the other side or in some other dimension. She wanted to be reunited with her children, apparently, and seemed to be separated from them somehow in the afterlife. Well, Rick went on to have a lot of other communications with personalities, and some of them had stranger stories than others. Some seemed to be very, what we would consider normal historical stories of people who lived in the past. But none of them came up with information that he could historically track down. And that doesn't mean that they aren't real. It just may mean that the records are unobtainable or don't exist. We just have no way of knowing.
All right.
Now,
sorry, I was just going to say we'll get to some phone calls here in a moment, but we're just going to get ready to take a time out. But I just want to tease a little bit about what's going to come up. I want to talk about Grace Kelly. She was a fan of the Ouija board. This was well known that she was involved in spirit communication. I didn't know that about her.
It got reported in the news media, and this was, it was surprising and not surprising because so many people considered the Ouija board entertainment. But she did like to use the Ouija board to ask about her horse betting. And this was reported in the entertainment news, and what wasn't reported was whether or not she ever won anything on the advice of the board.
Was Prince Rainier aware of this interest in the Ouija board?
He probably was. The one article that we were able to find about this didn't say what his opinion was, but she shared this interest with the wife of the actor Cary Grant. Her name was Betsy, and the two of them would get together and get their horse betting advice. And this was considered to be kind of silly entertainment. Cary Grant knew about it.
I'm gathering, though, that there was never any indication through the Ouija board to Grace Kelly about how she would die, or?
If there ever was, it was never reported. And there have been Ouija board cases, by the way, where deaths have been accurately predicted.
Well, we can touch on that when we come back. Rosemary Ellen Guiley, Ouija Gone Wild, shocking true stories. Stay with us.
As you're staring up at the night sky, ever wonder who's staring back? You're listening to Richard Syrett's Strange Planet.
Welcome back. Again, we're here with Rosemary Ellen Guiley, and it's Ouija Gone Wild, shocking true stories. We'll get to yours right now, and we'll begin with David in Toronto. Hello, David. Welcome.
Hello, Mr. Sarrett. Long-time listener, first-time caller.
I appreciate it. Welcome aboard.
Miss Guiley, first little story about Ouija boards. Back when I was in high school, which is years ago now, my buddy built his own, and he tried to contact his brother who died by a drunk driver when he was 8 years old. When he was using it, a whole bunch of weird stuff started happening in the house. People were visibly shaken that attended that night, and he claimed to see shadow people after in the house. A spirit board or a talking board does open portals, but can they stay open first?
They might stay open depending upon how the board has been used and what is attracted to the particular session. And the big wild card is human consciousness. Some people are more mediumistic than others, and they've got kind of a natural portal almost all the time, which can be activated. And when you augment it with something like a session with a major tool, that can heighten the link. In Ouija Gone Wild, we have a whole chapter on shadow people. I had quite a few cases reported to me where people said pretty much the same thing. They had sessions that just sort of took a dark turn, and the shadow people manifested in the room both during the session and lingered afterward. And in some cases, people had a period of nightmares and disturbances, poltergeist effects, and some of them had to struggle to get past it and to close the door. In these particular cases, it may be the individuals themselves who are more vulnerable than other people to spirit attachment, and in the right environment and the right opportunity, something happens. Most people are going to use a spirit communications device and not have those kinds of issues.
All right, David, thanks for the call. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, let's go next to Virginia in Niagara. Hello, Virginia. Welcome.
Hi. I want to talk about Ouija boards, but I must just tell you something first. My father's sister, my aunt, used to be a psychic for the British royal family of her time.
Ah, wow.
There was a lot of psychic in my family, and I've spoken with you before. I think you know about some of them.
Yes. Well, it's not so well known that Queen Victoria was.
It wasn't Queen Victoria.
No, I understand, but Queen Victoria was very interested in the spirit world.
The whole family, all the royals are.
Still to this day, amazing, interesting.
My story. After my father had just died, this man came up to me who I'd never met and asked me if we could talk. And I was dubious. And so we went to a couple of places, and then I took him to my apartment. And he lay on the floor, and he created a Ouija board. And he put it on, and we couldn't keep this. We had a glass upside down. We couldn't keep it on. It just went crazy and knocked everything flying. And he got cross, and he said, Virginia's father asked me to come to her, not the rest of you. Get lost. And he said to me, a lot of your friends have recently gone, and they've left you things, and you've got them all in this room, and they're all trying to get talking with you, and they're not working together. And I want to come with your father. And then it settled down, and he gave me some information about my father, which was very accurate, and I had to work on. But the funny part was he fell asleep, so I put a pillow under his head and a blanket around him and covered him tightly. And now the only way he can get out, we were several stories high, and the only way he can get out was through the door, and there was only a lock. It was an old lock, and I had to use the key inside and outside to get in. When I got up in the morning, he was gone, but it was as though he had just evaporated. The blankets were still there with the marks I put in them around him. He had just gone, and the door had not been opened.
My word.
And I asked several of my friends if they knew who he was, and nobody seemed to know. The other thing that amused me afterwards, when I thought about it, he never had anything to eat and drink. He always passed it to me to eat and drink.
Wow. What do you think so do you think that was a ghost, Virginia, that you'd invited in?
Could be. I really don't know. It was something that was very unusual, but I've had a lot of unusual things happen in my family, and we've discussed them.
We
and
have
I think
indeed.
It was something that he maybe sent over to communicate with me. I don't think it was of the earth.
Virginia, thank you for sharing that wonderful story. Remarkable.
Well, it sort of scared me a lot, but I'm not the scared sort. I've had a lot of phenomena happen.
Well, I look forward to you sharing some more in the future. What do you make of that, Rosemary?
It's very hard to come up with an explanation for a story like that. It's very unusual. There's just simply no explanation for it. There are manifestations of spirit where they seem to be real people, and they do interact with the living for a period of time, and then suddenly they're gone. They've fulfilled their purpose, and that's it.
You mentioned, or a previous caller, David, mentioned shadow people. What about the Jinn? This is an area that, you are really on the forefront of researching into the Vengeful Jinn, the title of one of your more recent books. Are there cases where people have used a Ouija board and then reported having some sort of a genie or Jinn infestation in their home?
There are entities that I think are Jinn. Most people don't call them Jinn because a lot of people in the West don't know what the Jinn are, or genies. But in the chapter that we have, Who Are the Communicators, we do discuss the presence of the Jinn. And I am convinced that shadow people are a form that the Jinn take when they want to come and cause human beings trouble. The trickster spirits who like to interfere, who like to be nice and then nasty, cause problems, and even manifest in the environment with poltergeist disturbances, are all characteristics of Jinn. So some people might call them demons or astral spirits or evil spirits, but they may be, in fact, Jinn, who could be just having a joke on us to wanting to torment people.
What about Ouija boards or talking boards used for treasure hunting? I know you write about that in Ouija Gone Wild.
Well, there's a number of kinds of treasure hunting, and we have some cases in the book where the Ouija board told people where treasure was buried. And there was one case where two teenage girls went out into frigid conditions in the wintertime and disappeared because they were going to go find the treasure. We have another case of a man who was told where to dig for treasure, and he dug, and the earth collapsed in on him, and he was killed. Then we have the treasure hunting through the lottery. Will the Ouija board give winning lottery numbers? And we have cases where winning numbers are given in a couple of instances for small wins, and so people keep consulting the board and keep betting, and then the numbers go bad. They don't win out. In fact, Rick had one of those cases himself where, just for a lark, he asked for a pick 3 combination and got the numbers, didn't buy a ticket, and the numbers turned out to be the winning numbers. So he went and told his coworkers about it, and everybody got excited and wanted the Ouija board to predict the next pick 3 win. And they were all going to bet on it, so he got 3 more numbers, and the numbers didn't win. It was like, ha-ha, I had a joke on you.
Now, are there do's and don'ts for using a Ouija board? I mean, are you able to provide us with sort of a list of things that you shouldn't do when you're using a Ouija board and things that you should do?
Yes, we have a chapter and an appendix as well of tips for
grounded use with the Ouija board. And some of them are just common sense things, like you shouldn't use one, if you've had alcohol or any sort of recreational stimulant, so to speak. It's not a good idea because you're not very well grounded. If you're tired, if you're not in good health, if you're just trying to entertain yourself, and this is where a lot of young people, I think, make trouble for themselves, is they want to be entertained, they want to be scared, they do a lot of provoking, let's see what you've got, scare us, that sort of thing. And if you make contact with the spirit world, there are spirits who will oblige you. They will be happy to scare you. You'll get what you ask for. Any kind of spirit communication should be approached with common sense to ask for specific information or a specific contact. If things get out of hand, to be firm to close the session. A lot of people bring anxiety and subconscious fear to any sort of spirit communication. And this is why I recommend that they not be used in paranormal investigation, simply because people have bizarre reactions themselves to the Ouija board. They're afraid of spirit communication, and that sort of atmosphere invites problems as well. Closing a session is very important. You end it and instruct all the communicators to remain on their side, that they are not to stay in the physical environment. Another thing that people need to do is to shut their minds off about the session, not to go over it and over it in their heads, replay it constantly, think about it, especially if they've been a little frightened about it, because these sorts of things invite a continuing link.
If you've had some sort of a nasty entity communicating with you through the Ouija board, what do? You stop the session immediately? How do you make sure that there's no further involvement with that entity?
How I handle that when that's come up, and it comes up in various kinds of spirit communications too, is I tell the entity to stop, to go away, that it's not welcome, and if it does not, then I end the session, and I just end it very firmly, and I instruct everything to go away, and I bring it to a close. And also that nothing is to stay, nothing is to linger in the environment or with any individual present. And then it is important to bring your own body energy field to a close as well, to shut down your consciousness, so to speak, to end that link.
Very quickly, Rosemary, final question. The proper disposal of an unwanted Ouija board?
Putting it in the garbage, throwing it in an incinerator, removing it from the premises is the best way to simply get rid of it.
If it comes back?
Do it over and over again, and if it keeps coming back, give it to find someone who's knowledgeable about the paranormal and objects that have spirit attachments to them, and hand it over to them.
Rosemary, thank you for Ouija Gone Wild, shocking true stories. Always great to talk to you.
Thank you, Richard, and don't forget my website, visionaryliving.com.
Excellent, visionaryliving.com. So long.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night. And don't forget my website, richardsarrett.com.